We've passed the point of no return with Donald Trump. And if we don't call him out for his responsible activities in encouraging this, we're responsible as well.
Do you have any comment on the actual news story?
I just said I condemn political violence in all situations.
The ICE situation.
You did.
Keith Boykin put smug MAGA goon Scott Jennings in his place on Abby Phillip show, this time over the crimes of ICE. We're going to take a look at clips of yet another heated panel on Abby Phillip show with Sarah Seidner filling in. It's delicious to see Keith Boykin hammering Scott Jennings. I want to share my thoughts as well. Let's get into it together.
A 43-year-old Army veteran is in custody, accused of throwing an incendiary device at a federal building that houses offices for immigration and customs enforcement in New York City. Now, you can see the moment that authorities say Andrew Arabaka threw the gasoline near the building. You see him throwing it there before lighting it on fire. Officials say the suspect had 2 axes, a hammer, a machete, and 3 knives, and a sign that read, quote, "ICE off our streets." The FBI warned he, quote, came armed with bad intentions. The White House board czar refused to comment on the investigation as it is ongoing, telling reporters he would let the investigation play out. But he did talk about who he thinks is partly to blame anyway, naming leftist politics for the current climate surrounding immigration enforcement.
What happened in front of the federal building is another example of attacking ICE. And I'm sure if you ask that person why he did it, he can repeat the talking points I just said that you hear from Democratic members of Congress, the Democratic mayors and governors who simply want ICE to go away. And us to keep attacking and miscommunicating what ICE does every day, calling them Nazis and comparing ICE to the Nazi regime. Are you kidding me? And for any member of Congress to keep attacking ICE and calling them fascists and Nazis, I said it 1,000 times. If they're a Nazi for enforcing the law, what's that make them? They wrote the law.
Now, before we open it up to the table here, we invite you at home to join this debate. Head to CNN.com/Abby and weigh in. We'll get to some of your comments throughout the show. Scott, I'm going to start with you. Words do matter. So do actions, right? I think we've talked about this before with, Republicans saying things, Democrats saying things, and then there's the actions of ICE as well. When you look at this, do you agree with Homan that this is something that is because of Democrats, or is this a single guy who decided to do something that was illegal?
Of course I agree with Homan, and it's not a single guy. This is another in a long string of attacks on ICE personnel, ICE facilities. There's been a massive spike in violence against ICE agents, really against all law enforcement, specifically federal law enforcement out there. So I think Mr. Homan is absolutely correct. And I think you've got members of Congress, the mayor of New York City, governors, as Homan said, all sorts of people out there who are using language that would lead someone to go do these kinds of things. It's despicable. These people are effectively political vigilantes. They've been programmed by the left to go out and take matters into their own hands. And it ought to be stopped right now. I noticed Mamdani today, put out a statement saying, this is bad, we're going to cooperate. This is the same guy who has said some of the worst things about ICE, who says he wants to defund the police, and makes a lot of anti-law enforcement rhetoric a staple of his political movement. I don't know how you can reconcile those positions, and I don't suppose they'll even try. But I think Homan's right.
But is it possible that it's the actions of ICE that have people talking like this, not just getting messaging from the Democrats, but seeing what's happening in their communities?
So if you believe that a government agency is doing something that you don't like, and your choices are A, cast a vote, B, use your words, or C, go set off an incendiary device at the federal building in New York City, and you pick C, there's no justification for this. There's no rationalization of it, and it's patently ridiculous if that is what anybody's going to argue tonight.
Keith, how do you think?
Let's take Scott's scenario. If you believe a government agency is doing something wrong, do you use your vote, do you use your words, or do you resort to violence? In one very clear example, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, implicitly encouraged people to resort to violence. That was the January 6th insurrection. He didn't tell people your vote was enough. The 80-something lawsuits that we filed were enough. He didn't tell people we're just going to settle this in sort of a peaceful way. He actually encouraged people to walk from the ellipse to the Capitol, not knowing what might happen, and knowing that these people were armed and violent. This guy, Donald Trump, is responsible for some of the worst, most incendiary, most politically violent rhetoric in our country. So I don't accept this statement from Scott at all. Violence, political violence, is wrong, whether it's left or right. The problem is, I don't know any president on the Democratic side in my lifetime who's ever encouraged political violence. In fact, I don't know any Republican president in my lifetime who's ever encouraged political violence until Donald Trump. We have crossed the proverbial standard here. We've passed the point of no return with Donald Trump. And if we don't call him out for his responsible activities in encouraging this, we're responsible as well.
Do you have any comment on the actual news story?
I just said I condemn political violence in all situations. What you did is you took this situation and you agreed with Tom Homan's talking point that somehow this is a Democratic case. But the reality is the studies have shown that in the past decade or so, 112 of the past right-wing, of the 112 right-wing murders have taken place. Only 13 have taken place from the left.
So you don't have any comment on this?
No, I just told. What else is there to say except I condemn it, Scott? You want me to say more than that?
Yeah.
What else? You don't say. You haven't said yet. What did you say about Donald Trump and the January 6th insurrection? The fact that he pardons people. The fact that he actually tried to create a $1.8 billion fund to support those people.
I'm long on the record about political violence.
How about condemning?
I love this from Keith Boykin here, spitting facts as Scott Jennings sits there with his smug look on his face. Scott Jennings says to Keith Boykin, you have any comments on this story? Scott Jennings is the guy who every single night that he's on Abby Phillip show, it doesn't matter what the story is, what the topic is, what somebody on the left or the Democrat or the liberal is saying about Donald Trump, Scott Jennings' response is, yeah, but what about Biden? Yeah, but what about the Democrats? It's rich for this scumbag, Scott Jennings, to be like, can't you stay on topic when he's the guy who does nothing but say, yeah, but what about the Democrats? And Scott Jennings throws out the standard BS of all violence is up against law enforcement officers. Last year, in 2025, 109 law enforcement officers died on duty. Most of those were not in cases of violence perpetrated against them. Most were car accidents. That's how most police officers die. But 109 compared to 1975, when there were 240 officers die on duty in a country with a much smaller population in 1975. But again, it's another myth. It's propaganda from the MAGA goons like Scott Jennings. And one more thing, Keith Boykin really points out the difference here, in my opinion, between the left and the right, where Keith Boykin is denouncing all violence. Doesn't matter whether somebody on the left perpetrated it or somebody on the right perpetrated it. Scott Jennings can't do that. He can only denounce the left. Scott Jennings is never going to denounce violence committed by the right, which is much more than the left. And Scott Jennings is never going to denounce his God King, Donald Trump. Let's see a bit more of Scott Jennings here.
The reason why Democrats did not do anything about that is because your president, Donald Trump, told them not to. They had a bipartisan immigration bill, and Donald Trump called up the United States senators and said, do not pass that bill.
No, I'm talking about the law.
I'm talking about immigration enforcement. Right. You said, why didn't Democrats do something about all the immigrants coming in? They tried to do something, and Donald Trump said, don't do it. No, as far as reforming or limiting ICE, Democrats are taking action right now. They're sending a letter. First of all, not that that's enough.
Why didn't they just stop the illegal immigration?
But 10 people have been killed by ICE since this year.
A lot of people have been killed by illegal
ICE in the past year. Since Donald Trump took office. That didn't happen under Biden's administration.
Let me make sure I understand. This deranged anti-ICE leftist tries to blow up the federal office in New York today, and that's Donald Trump's fault. Joe Biden.
Nobody said that.
You just gave a long speech about it.
Here we go. Scott Jennings, who's just saying, hey, can't you stay on subject? Don't you have a comment on this story to Keith Boykin? And here Scott Jennings goes with his, yeah, but what about Biden BS? Just like clockwork.
Never said that. You didn't listen to a word I said, did you?
No one said that.
Joe Biden doesn't enforce immigration laws. And that's Donald Trump's fault. I'm trying to identify the end of the Choose Your Own Adventure book where it doesn't end with it's Donald Trump's fault. Stephen is right. They did not enforce the law. And you know who will tell you that? Anybody that works for ICE today will tell you when they were working there under Biden, they were told not to enforce immigration law. We haven't passed any new laws. And today, we had the 14th straight month of no releases at the border. The border is closed. Not a single new law was passed. The only difference is the feds are enforcing longstanding existing law. And you have Democrats now demonizing the people enforcing it, and you have people like this lunatic showing up trying to blow up the federal building.
Nobody's supporting this guy who did the firebombing at the federal building today. So let's get that clear. What we are saying is that if you're going to condemn political violence, at least be consistent, because the top purveyor of political violence in our country is Donald Trump.
Let me just, you mentioned something, Christina.
And that's a mic drop moment from Keith Boykin there. The number one purveyor of political violence in the United States is Donald Trump. And what does Scott Jennings do? He just gives his smirk, looks in the camera, and takes a drink. Because Scott Jennings knows he has no response to that other than, yeah, but what about Biden? That's all he has. Scott Jennings has no legitimate political points. He has no policies that the American people agree with, and everything is projection with MAGA and Donald Trump. All of their claims about all of the violence of the left, it's just projection because we all know that it's the right who is committing most of these violent acts. And Keith Boykin points out 10 people killed by ICE. There should be 0 people killed by ICE. And the thing about it is, we've not seen one of these instances where the person that the ICE agent or ICE agents, these ICE Gestapo thugs, killed, murdered, was any kind of a violent criminal. So it really is propaganda on the part of Scott Jennings to claim that the left is violent and politicians on the left are calling for violence, like Mamdani. He's not calling for violence, but we know that Donald Trump is. Keith Boykin pointed that out on Abby Phillip show, and Scott Jennings is never going to admit the truth. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think this is the truth? Do you agree with me that, and Keith Boykin, that Donald Trump may be the figure most responsible for political violence ever in the history of the country, at least the modern history of the country? Or do you agree with Scott Jennings and say, yeah, but what about Biden, and blame the Democrats for everything? Let me know what you think about this heated panel on Abby Phillip show. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. I'm Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.